Joining us now, MSNBC political analyst and former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Julián Castro, and Maura Gillespie, who was an advisor to former House Speaker John Boehner. Julián, Trump's border pick on the border czar issue, Tom Homan, was on Fox this morning. He was also recently on 60 Minutes being interviewed by Cecilia Vega, talking about what this deportation effort could look like. Take a listen to this.
I've seen some of these Democratic governors say they're going to stand in the way. They're going to make it hard for us. Well, a suggestion: if you're not going to help us, get the hell out of the way, but we're going to do it. So if we can't get assistance from New York City, and we may have to double the number of agents we send to New York City because we're going to do the job.
Is there a way to carry out mass deportation without separating families?
Of course there is. Families can be deported together.
Julián, how do you see this, and realistically, how much of this do you think could actually be carried out?
Well, I mean, this is a guy who was the architect of family separation, the former acting ICE director. This time he comes back with even more experience in these years to gather more cruel ideas, and also, I think, more of a green light from Donald Trump and less people around him who are there to stop the worst impulses that he and Donald Trump have. And also, let's add people like Stephen Miller. So this is a very experienced crew. You can tell there, even from the sound bites, I said, this is a guy with a cowboy attitude that constantly dehumanizes people who are simply seeking a better life in the United States. And it's particularly disturbing that he does that with children, who are not making a decision about whether to come here or not. Now, it is going to be more possible for them to get things done, I think, in this administration, at least at the outset. They have said that from the beginning, they're going to try and initiate the largest deportation effort. They have a Supreme Court that is more willing, I think, to go along with administrative actions on their part. And so it's going to require a lot of pushback. And at the same time, there's a danger in the American population that there's fatigue from resisting and pushing back. So these first couple of weeks, I think, are going to be crucial to see whether there's going to be that sufficient pushback and will to stop what would be a very cruel exercise in federal policy, and I think ultimately decimate the American economy if it's carried out.
And Maura, I mean, there's also the reality, the political reality, that with the election of Donald Trump, a significant number of voters supported what Trump was promising. I mean, this deportation plan was among Trump's main campaign promises. What are the political risks, whether he carries this out or not?
He also did get a large portion of a Latino vote. So I think it's important to remember that there is also concerns about, when we talk about humane treatment of human beings and of the people who emigrate here. Both my grandfathers emigrated here to seek a better life. And so I think that when you talk about it from a humane aspect, it has to be the land of hope and opportunity, but we can only be that with law and order. And so it's been largely viewed as we have a crisis at the border. And when you have people who are committing crimes, they should be deported. Right. So I think that was a pretty general sense among the population that was a common sense reaction and a proposal to put forward. I think it's, like you both said, it'll take time to see what really pans out as far as some of the more extreme things that Tom Homan has said. But I am hopeful that step one will be to, deport those who have committed crimes as far as murder and things of that nature, and then move forward from there with a more pragmatic approach to how we handle our border security.
Yeah, but I mean, Maura, the fact of the matter is that if you just look at numbers, and let's look at it from a cold perspective, not taking any political position at all, if you are talking about creating the largest deportation force in American history, and you're talking about deporting the criminals, the rapists and murderers, the numbers there would not seem to match. In other words, I don't think there's anybody who says that if you are a criminal in the United States and that you do not have the legal standing to be here, then you should be prosecuted and deported, but jailed as well. It's just what you do going after that process. And more, I think that when you're talking about the largest deportation force in history that seems to imply more than just X amount of thousands of people who are criminals.
And I don't disagree with you. I think that rhetoric isn't helpful, and it certainly doesn't give us it gives us a more dark and damning kind of look at the future. But when you're talking about those who have been imprisoned or did get arrested for the murders they committed, we've seen several cases come out that they were released. And so I think that because border security has been so overwhelmed, we do need to reassess the situation. And the Biden administration was too slow to do that in a large way. And maybe they didn't have the resources, but realistically, the country voted because they felt as though both economically, but safety was a concern of theirs. And I do think that the rhetoric that is being used isn't helpful. We don't need to make blanket statements about an entire population of people here. But I do think that the concerns were, again, expressed on Election Day, that this is a concern that people have and needs to be addressed by our administration. Whoever is in power needs to put our security as a focus.
And Julián, I mean, you know, and I keep thinking, I was just actually just commenting on this morning, how, you know, this is something that you have been talking about for years. And I just think of your participation in the debates in 2020. I mean, the issue, right, of migration, immigration, comprehensive immigration reform. There are so many different parts to this picture. And I'm just wondering, Julián, where is it that people just got it wrong? Why? It's such a surprise for so many, these decisions of voters this last election. You've been talking about it forever. Where did people just not hear this?
Well, I mean, I think you look at the progression, right? Mitt Romney, I think it was in the 2012, one of the 2012 Republican debates, gets laughed off the stage essentially when he talks about, or maybe it was 2008, self-deportation. So you go from that to, in 2024, in those 15, 16 years, basically Donald Trump espousing mass deportation of millions and millions of people, many of whom who have been here and who have been law-abiding since they got here. And folks are saying that that's suddenly okay. I don't think that the American public is going to respond well if mass deportation actually starts happening. In other words, on paper versus the reality of it, families being separated, children being sent to camps before they're sent to a country they didn't even know. The reality of mass deportation is that it would be ugly, it would be cruel. I don't think the American public would support it ultimately, but it's a policy that is a lot easier to swallow in theory than it is in practice. Part of this is not just the cruelty and the xenophobia of Donald Trump, it's also that Democrats did not push back sufficiently, especially over Biden's term. And I've said this many times. You don't go from where we were to where we are unless basically Trump had a megaphone to just keep talking and talking and persuading without any significant pushback from the other side. That needs to change.
Maura, meanwhile, Congresswoman Stefanik will be serving in the post that Nikki Haley held under the first Trump administration. The weekend, Trump stated he is not offering Haley a spot in his administration or Mike Pompeo. What does this tell you? What's the message that Trump is sending?
He's certainly getting a lot of influence from Elon Musk, Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr., who have been very vocal about not wanting to be involved in what is happening in other countries. So I think he was sending a message, one, that he heard them and was going to make sure that Pompeo and Haley weren't part of his administration. But also, I mean, think about what Haley had said about him during the Republican primary for the nomination to be president. She said a lot of things that Donald Trump does not forget. And he, again, has said time and time again that loyalty is his number one credential and requirement for any positions he posts. And while I think for a lot of us that does give us cause for concern, I think that we have to give it some time. And there will be a referendum, in 2 years where voters can say whether they liked these first 2 years or not. We also have checks and balances. So I think it's important to keep some of that in mind as we share some concerns about the rhetoric being used and some of the promises that he has made. He's not always going to follow through on them. So again, I just think that some of these appointments or some of these names being floated maybe won't get through, or you know, again, maybe they're just being said to appease some people on the far right.